basically.
Business is a revenue generating machine. Turning this revenue into wealth and ultimately freedom involves planning and execution. This is the focus of today's episode with our guest Ben Law, also known as the Financial Bloke. Ben was a financial advisor for over 20 years. For health reasons, he sold his business and now hosts the Financial Bloke's Wealth and Wisdom podcast. He's also a rural strategic coach for farming families and agribusinesses to help them align their family, grow their wealth, and protect the family legacy. Ben's journey isn't just about finance. It's about the pivotal life lessons that have taken him from the farm to financial advisory, and now to mentoring leaders on wealth and well-being. If you want health and wealth from your business, stay tuned to my interview with the Financial Bloke, Ben Law. Can you share some pivotal moments in your journey from growing up on a farm to becoming what you're called as the Financial Bloke?
Well, pivotal moments. Well, I'm guessing there's a whole lot of those, but the ones that I thought about this, Brendan. I gave it a bit of thought. I thought there's two real pivotal things that I learned in my childhood, which I think have really set me up well in life, and also I think are really good lessons to learn in life. And the first one is growing up on a farm with my parents. Money was really tight. You know, most farmers don't have a lot of money floating around. They work really, really hard, harder than anyone else I know. And my mum said to me when I was little, she doesn't remember it, but she said to me, Benjamin, get a financial education and don't be like us. And that was the number one piece of advice she gave me. And I suppose I took that bull by the horns, so to speak, and I actually ran with it. And I went off and I studied economics at uni. I then went out and became a financial advisor and spent 20 years doing that. And so what I'd spent all that time doing was trying to work out how this whole money and wealth works. Because I think if you're in business, you need to know how money and wealth works. And I use the word wealth interchangeably because I think wealth is bigger than just money. The second one is your network is your best net worth, or it equals your net worth. And my mum used to say to me when I was a kid, I can see who you've been hanging around with, Ben, for better or worse. And I think throughout my career, I've spent a whole lot of time meeting great people and fostering a really good network. And what I came to realize as I grew up through my career in business was that your friends aren't necessarily the best network to have. If you want to be successful in life, and you need to basically go out there and construct your own network of the people you want to be surrounded with. Now, the mistake I see, Brendan, a lot of people make is they think, I need to surround myself with successful, driven, wealthy people. And I'm not sure that's right. I think, success in life means different things to different people. But for me, what I realized as I got older and a lot more gray in my beard, as you can see, is that money is important and success is important, but it's all the other things in life that make it worthwhile. And I think, we have to start thinking about things differently. So building that network was the other real pivotal thing that I learned over that time. My dad used to sit me, we used to go off to bull sales back in the day, or cattle sales. And I was one of those annoying little 6 or 7 year olds. And Dad would be off working and doing stuff, and he'd pop me on the rail sitting beside someone. And he'd say, chat to that old guy. And now that old guy was probably our age now. Brandon, but we'd have those conversations, and they actually became part of my network. They fostered me in. They helped educate me and help me understand, about life and the world and the bigger picture. So, yeah, I think get a financial education if you're in business. Be careful who you mix with. Build your network, and I think ultimately be curious about the world.
Was that sort of get a financial education that was part of the driving force around your background in financial planning? And then if so, how did that pan out, and what took you out of financial planning?
I think subconsciously it probably was. I was never really that interested in, money and finance and all those sorts of things. I was taught to be a good saver, but it wasn't naturally something I necessarily, got drawn into. But I went to uni and did economics. It seemed like something interesting to do. I got into uni, and then when I sort of fell into financial advice, and I found I really, really enjoyed financial advice and I was good at it. And I spent a whole 20 years doing it. I worked for a hedge fund in London for a period of time. I know you spent time in London, and I did that, and I got to see a bigger world over there. But then I spent, pretty much probably 10 to 15 years working with business owners, helping them grow, protect, and then transition their wealth. But what happened to me, Brendan, which you're alluding to, is I got out of financial advice roughly 2 years ago. I retired from the industry. I had a successful business. We had more clients than we could look after, a team of people that worked for me, winning awards. And I actually had a health scare. I had a heart scare. And at that stage of my life, I was, 43, 44. I made the decision that, I wanted to do something different. And that was sort of rooted in the whole thing that the cardiologist I saw at the time said, Ben, you didn't have a heart attack. You're now part of the fake heart attack club. But yeah, we basically, if you keep going like this with these levels of stress, you're going to, burn out essentially. And so that got me to leave financial advice and then get into being the financial bloke.
So the fake heart attack is something related to stress. Is that what you mean?
It was just that I had all the symptoms, but I didn't have a heart attack. And so that's my way of using humour to diffuse the problem, which is just, I say I'm now a member of the fake heart attack club.
Oh, that's your term. That's not
that
the
is
medical
definitely
term,
not the
mate.
medical term. We call that a Benism.
I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
A Benism? I love a Benism. I forgot to say, I'm not sure, certainly on YouTube we can see this, but I've actually worn a special shirt for you today, mate. Have you noticed my little R.M. Williams shirt?
Yep. Well, I've got the blue shirt, so it's the blue shirt brigade today.
Specially designed and picked just for you, buddy.
Awesome.
Growing up on a farm, and you and I have known each other for a long time through sort of other friends and relations of yours. So how has that shaped your approach to leadership and the financial education side of things?
Well, I think I really struggle with leadership, and I always have, Brendan. And I know I worked it out a few years ago. Most entrepreneurs, that includes, and farmers, because that's my background, are what I call rugged individualists. And what that means is through necessity, they do everything themselves. So they become the jack of all trades. So when you're on a farm, there's not much money. You don't just pay people to come and do the fencing or fix the tractor or, whatever it might be. You do it yourself, and you learn to do everything yourself, and you don't ask for help. And I think entrepreneurs are the same, mate. And so entrepreneurs, there's not much money. They're starting up. They're in the bootstrapping phase, and they like to do everything themselves. Now, the thing is that rugged individualist is what made you successful. So it really did make you successful. But you get to a point where you can't be a rugged individualist. You have to actually start to get other people to help you. It becomes really, really important to do that. And so for me, that's what I always struggle with. I did everything myself. When I started the Financial Bloke, I built the website. When I do all the podcasting, I learned how to do all the bits and pieces. But unfortunately, that's not scalable. And so that's what I struggled with leadership. But that changed over time, and I realized that I needed to actually be different. I needed to be able to lead a team, lead people, lead our clients, etc. So that was the first thing. The second thing I'd say, mate, is the one thing that I did take away from the farming world is your word is your reputation. So when you say you're going to do something, you do it. You're honest, you're reliable, you're dependable, you're hardworking, all those sorts of things. And if you're not, what happens is everyone knows that and your reputation gets trashed. So I think in a leadership role for me, what I found is having that ability to be trustworthy was really, really important. And so that's what I've always lent on. Now, has that always worked? No. People take advantage of that sometimes. But I believe if you can be trustworthy in your leadership role, you're going to get much better results. Now, the thing with it is what I came to realize is that trust, or if you're trustworthy, is far more than just honesty. So you can meet someone that's honest, but you don't necessarily trust them. And I've come to realize that trust is about sincerity. It's doing the right thing. Dependability, so being dependable and reliable, so doing what you say you'll do. And then number 3 is competent, so being competent in what you do. And I think a good leader has to have all those 3 traits.
Yeah, absolutely great points. Just in relation to the move from the financial planning side into what you're doing today, very successfully, I might add, on both sides, what was it about you? Have you unpacked that or reflected on that sort of character side of you that, yes, there was a health scare, I get that, but there is a character involved in sort of closing down, moving on from something very successful that supported your family for a couple of decades now into what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, it was a struggle. I have to say, going through because it was traumatic to sell my business. It really was to decide to make that decision to leave. And there's a long story behind it, but essentially I did it for the right reason, but it was very traumatic and hard. But the harder part, that was the first part. The second part, which was even harder in many ways, was the who was I? Now that I've sold my successful financial advice practice and, we were winning awards and we had accolades and, we had great clients we worked with, like, who was I? I was no longer Ben Law, the financial advisor. I was Ben Law, the lawnmower man, mowing our lawn every third day.
Nobody.
Yeah, nobody. And so that really made a big difference. And that was really, really hard. And then, I've stepped out into the Financial Bloke and we do the strategic coaching. And what I realized was my unique skill is 2 things. And I don't say this egotistically. I just say, critically, there's some things I'm damn good at and there's some things that I'm bloody useless at. But what my skill was is being able to, connect with people and meet people where they're at, and then also take complex things and turn them into something simple using analogies and stories. So it's being able to extract what the actual problem is in someone's situation and then find a solution and then be able to explain that. So almost like going to a doctor and saying, "What's wrong with me, doctor?" And the doctor says, "You need to take this medicine." And then the patient doesn't take that medicine. They walk away and they don't take it. Well, my skill and what I've tried to foster over the years is the ability to be able to get people to take that medicine ongoing and then come back again for another diagnosis, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I guess you had to take some of your own sort of medicine, some of your own advice in some of this scenario, in this transition. What sort of pressures did it place on yourself and the family, this transition?
Well, I think I probably drove Sarah insane for a fair period of time because we were stuck in the house together.
Probably well before that even.
And I think it got to the point, it was actually lucky that I started the podcast because I promised her I'd take a year because I'm pretty driven and I don't like sitting around. I mean, that's the farming background. If you're sitting around doing nothing, you're lazy. So I'm always a pretty hard worker. And it was when I got to the podcast that I went, you know what, I want to start this podcast. I want to give it a go. I've been talking about it for ages. I think I might do okay at it. And that was the small transition. So I took that year off because there was, and then at about a year, I started to get annoying. I if you could see around my office right now, mate, there's Post-it notes everywhere of every color with notes and, little quotes and ideas and stories. And it looks like a Muppet's thrown up in here. And so that started to really put the pressure on with Sarah because she says, "You're driving me insane," because I come in, "I've got this idea. I was thinking about this." And so having something I could dig my teeth or get my teeth into really was important at that stage. And that's what I found with the podcast, which then led on to, building it into a business.
Yeah, and you've certainly harnessed that energy for good and for helping people. So well done on your continued success, mate. Let's focus our energy. We talked a bit about character and, again, part of the process around building confident leaders, I believe, is developing character, building competence, and creating connection. So I want to talk a bit about this competence side, because the wealth creation side for business owners is super important for anyone, but we're focused a bit on business owners. So what are the top skills you think business owners need to grow their wealth?
Well, I think you got to define wealth first, Brendan. What does actually wealth mean to you? Now, initially, when you ask that question, usually they say things like money in the bank, gold, shares, real estate, all those sorts of things. But you've got to think about what does actually wealth mean. And then you've got to start to go, okay, well, where is let's assuming it's monetary based or assets based, so property, shares, cash, business, etc. Where's my money actually stored? And then how much risk's involved? And so I spend a whole lot of time with business owners over 20 years talking to them about, your job is to grow your business and produce profit sustainably. It's okay to make a huge profit this year and then a loss next year. That's not good. We want sustainable, consistent profit. And to do that, you've got to become competent at what you're doing. But then what you've got to do is you've got to think of it a little bit like a casino. And people look at me and go, what do you mean a casino, Ben? Well, all the people that use a casino essentially go in and then, you make some money, you take a little bit off the table. You play the chips again, you take a little bit off the table, and you not know where to fold them. And so I tried to spend a lot of time with people saying, well, look, your business is probably your most valuable asset at this stage, but it may not be in the future. So every year, you got to start taking some money off the table and then investing it elsewhere. So whether you're buying shares, buying property, putting money into super, whatever that might be. And what that does is you may not quite make as much money, maybe reinvesting everything back into the business for growth. But what you're doing is you're giving yourself a bit of a backstop. You're giving yourself some assets that you can liquidate if times get tough, use as security, and also fund a retirement. Because a big mistake I see people make in business, Brendan, is they get to retirement thinking that their business will be their retirement asset. And not always does that work out. So you want to be thinking, okay, well, how can I build a business outside of my actual business? And I'd call it as a passive investment or a passive business where I can keep putting money into that business and grow it so it's just as big, if not bigger, than my actual business that I'm running. And to do that, you've got to become not only a competent business owner, you've got to then be competent enough to be able to manage your family wealth. And so what I spend a lot of time with people over the years is moving their consciousness from, this money's in the business and it's my money, to what is the longer term picture here? Don't just focus on today or next year. Start thinking about your retirement self, 25 years down the track or 30 years down the track. Start thinking about your retirement self. What about your kids? What are you going to leave behind for your kids? And you can only do that if you understand how to manage that wealth.
Everything makes sense. It's like a lot of things in these sort of scenarios. It's very sensible advice and there's sensible ways to go, but there's probably a fair chunk of people that don't do it. They know that they should, but they don't. So what sort of challenge do you come up with in that sort of advice giving in transition? Like what's holding people back from actually taking the right action to do what you've said?
Complexity and trying to do it themselves. So there's a real paradox with intelligence and success. It amazed me how often I'd find people in business that weren't academically or on paper the smartest people you'd ever meet, but they were by far the most successful and wealthy. So the more intelligent you are, the more successful you are, the more you want to control things. And I'll give you an example as doctors. Doctors were incredibly difficult to deal with because they'd spent their whole careers learning and learning and learning. And for the vast majority of them, not all of them, but the vast majority I found couldn't handle not knowing and not knowing how to do it. And it's the same with successful business owners. If you've built a construction business or a tire manufacturing business or a retail chain, you've been hugely successful. So you think, okay, so I thought I could do this myself. And invariably what happens is you spread yourself too thin. So the first thing is complexity. So when you're successful in business or when you're intelligent even, or feel like you've got success, is you'll naturally overcomplicate things. Simple doesn't seem right, whereas quite often simple is the best solution. Number two is they try and be rugged individualists. They try and do it themselves and go, oh, look, I could manage my wealth better myself than some other bozo, as you quite often hear. But if you can find the right the person to help you do that, you'll accelerate your chances of success. Now, if you find the wrong person, granted, that can be disastrous, but you need to find that right person. So don't be a rugged individualist. Keep it simple and find the right the people to help you. And that's not usually just one person. So that can literally be multiple people. It could be, your accountant to help you with structuring and, how do we protect these assets? It could be financial advisors or stockbrokers or real estate agents or buyer's agents to be able to build the wealth. And it could be lawyers to be able to help you do structuring and transition it to your family if something goes wrong with you. So it's going to require multiple people, but you've got to basically, find those right people and get a process. The other thing really quickly is have a process in place. So what I find a lot of people do is you're busy, you're successful, you're leading a team, you've got your family, you've got kids, health. There's a whole lot of things going on in your life. You need to find a way of putting a process in place that it just happens, okay? You don't want to be responsible to have to keep the ball moving forward. So I'd see a lot of people that had come in and they go, Ben, I got this sort of stuff all set up and then I forgot about it. And 3 years later, I came back and it was a disaster. Put a process in place to be able to force you to do what needs to be done. And there's really easy ways of doing that. Brendan?
Before I ask a question around that process, but I can't help thinking that, I know you referred to doctors and a couple of other ones that I can't remember exactly, but what jumped in my head is that they're quite transactional type businesses. You're sort of coming in and you're transacting, and then somebody else is coming in and you're transacting. It's almost like trading dollars for time, when in a wealth creation side of things, it feels like that, for me, it feels like that mindset hinders. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, correct. I think the number one things that people need to get their head around first, and this is where a lot of people get stuck as well, is around your why you're doing it. You got to really dig in and think, okay, I've got this business, I've got this career, I'm making this money, I want to start to build monetary wealth. Why the hell do you want to do it? Is it retirement? Is there enough money that you go, holy dooly, I'd like to be able to build something up for my children? Family businesses are very important like that. They get handed down through the generations. So getting really clear on your why is important. I think that's the first place you want to be. And so as soon as you get busy, Brendan, and you go, oh, I haven't got time to do that, you need to have a strong why, otherwise you won't do it. So you got to work on that why first. And I think, yeah, it's transactional. So it's just like, I've got this problem, I need to fix it, and then that's it. But if you've got a really strong why, you may come back and transact with that person over and over again, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Skipping to the process side, you mentioned about having a strong can you give us an example of what a process would look like around this financial side of things we're talking about?
So, mate, I explain things really simply. So I'm going to oversimplify things to the nth degree. The reason is the simpler it is, the easier it is for people to get the concepts. So I'd have families come to me and they'd have an agribusiness in this case, most of them, or something regionally based like a construction or an aircraft business or something like that, a small business. And I'd say to them, righto, well, what's the plan? What's the long-term goal here? So you'd have to work on your why first, figure out what you're doing it for. Then what you'd have to do is say, okay, I know what I'm doing, and let's assume it's for retirement, because that's usually why the real motivator for people is to say, well, look, I'm working in my business. I don't want to have to work forever. I don't want to get to retirement, find out my business is not worth what I thought it was. I want to be financially secure for retirement. And so you go, okay, well, how much do you need to put in? Like, how much do you need in retirement? So you do something called a retirement needs analysis, which says, I'm 40 now, let's say, and I want to retire at 60. And I want $100,000 a year to live off. And then you do the maths. You say, okay, well, I need, let's say, $2 million invested to be able to retire on without selling my business. And if you do sell the business, and it's cream on top. And then you work back from there and you go, okay, well, that means I need to put, let's just say, $20,000 a year into an investment of some description, so that after 20 years, I've got $2 million. Now, that's not the maths, but you get what I'm saying about. And so you know exactly, okay, can my business sustain 20 grand a year? Maybe it can sustain more. Maybe it can't sustain that much. You got to work that out. And then there's either a gap or not. Then what you have to do is say, okay, well, where am I going to put that money? And for some people, we might put it into an investment company, like a company in their own names. It could be in super or something like that. You got to work that out and get that advice. But what you want to do is you want to have buckets, and you basically want to set up those buckets. And this is where people make the mistake, Brendan, is they go back and they go, well, I'm going to do all this when I've got lots of money. So what I'd do is I'd sit down with these business owners and I'd say, righto, in this case, let's assume you're going to put your money into super, some money into super, and some money you set up a company and invest in the company. And you'd say, righto, well, let's set those investment buckets up. So all you've got to do from a business point of view is earn the profit and then put that money into those buckets. Now, that could be we've bought an investment property, we've borrowed $500,000 to buy that investment property, and then we're going to pay 20 grand a year extra to pay it off by the time we retire. It might be we buy 20 grand's worth of shares, or 20 grand's worth of managed funds. It depends what you want. But then what you got to do is you got to do it monthly. And so what I'd talk to people about is if you say it's $12,000 a year you want to take out of your business and you want to invest outside of the business to build your wealth, well then $1,000 a month should go across into that investment. So paying down that debt or servicing that debt or investing into shares or whatever it might be. And then it becomes consistent. And so I'd start with people, Brendan, just giving you an example where they go, oh, Ben, I'm not really confident with this investing. We know business, but we don't understand this. So we'd set up the buckets. And in some cases, we do like 2 grand. You set up, 2 grand in their super fund, 2 grand outside of super, and they'd have $100 a month going across. But then 6 or 7 or 8 years later, as they got comfortable with it and we increased it each year, they'd be up to 4, 5, 6 grand a month would be going across into those investments, and it would grow exponentially. And it was like having that structure in place so you could get comfortable with it, and then the discipline of the regular amounts going over. Now, without going on about this for too long, mate, but what I'd say is if you struggle with the idea of doing this, just imagine you're putting future you on the payroll. So you can imagine Brendan is 65. You put him now on the payroll and you pay him, let's just say 50 grand a year or 48 grand a year. So 4 grand a month comes out of your business account straight over into this bucket. And that's like paying future Brendan. And then that changes the mindset a little bit about why you're actually doing this. But you have to monitor it. And 9 times out of 10, people need help to do that and get the discipline. Just like a personal trainer in many ways. You go to the gym, they give you a great fitness plan. 3 weeks later, you're sitting at home eating potato chips. Whereas there's someone screaming at you to, get down and do another 10 push-ups, Brendan, that's what we need you to do. You're more likely to follow through with the plan.
And I imagine like any habits, particularly talking financial habits now, if you can make that process of transfer even as frictionless as possible, i.e. if I've got to remember, set something in my calendar to do the transfer, then there's a chance of not doing it. But if I just set up a direct transfer, direct debit, then it just happens. So I'd imagine trying to create the habit as frictionless as possible would be beneficial.
Without a doubt, it's absolutely imperative. It's the discipline and the less friction. So having that regular amount going out always has to be, a direct debit or an automatic transfer. Otherwise, it never happens. People would always say to me, mate, when we get to 30 June, close to the end of the year, we'll do our tax planning with our accountant and we'll see what we can put away for the next 12 months. Invariably, people would get to 30 June, and this is what I used to get to, and I'd fight with them saying, well, we're going to put 20 grand a year in this year, Brendan, on 30 June, and you go, I haven't got any money this year. We spent it all on, a trip to Fiji, or we were reinvesting back in the business, buying another truck. And I'd say, but if all throughout the year you've been putting so much money across, it'd be in there. It just becomes part of the expenses of the business. And I think the other side to try and look at it as well is within your business, like most businesses have a big cost structure. It's not unreasonable to sit in a business and they're spending $500,000, $600,000, $10 million is going out of the account in expenses each year. Well, if you take a small slither of that and just treat it like an expense, it becomes a very small part of your overall cost structure of your business. And it's just a way of protecting that business as well. Because if you set it up appropriately and something does go wrong in the business, or you're looking to expand or reinvest back in the business, well, potentially you've got the opportunity to liquidate some of those assets if it makes sense. Obviously, take into account tax and all those other sorts of things.
Mate, you mentioned the word mindset a couple of times, but just recently. So you've talked about a money mindset and changing that into a prosperity mindset. What does that mean?
Well, I think so. Really, to keep it simple, prosperity means different things to different people. But ultimately, for me, prosperity means I've got enough money and wealth to be financially secure, because that's my number one personal value, is financial security. And we can dig into that another time, but that's because of my background growing up in a rural space. So I was always driven to have financial security. That's me. But that's not necessarily prosperity, because what you can do is you can end up investing all your time in making more money, and that comes at a cost. Someone said to me once, Brendan, they said, you will either pay, Ben, or you will pay. And if you think about it, whatever you do in life, if everything goes into your business, that's all your money goes into the business, you spend all your time in the business, no time with your family, something suffers. And so for my scenario, everything was going back into the business and my health started to suffer. And when I decided to retire from the industry, my wife said something to me, Brendan, which really hit home, and I struggled with it for a couple of weeks, but she said, it seems to me the business gets the best of you, Ben, and we quite often get the worst. And so a prosperous life is a balance, which, in other words, you're aware of the debits and credits. For the accountants listening, whenever there's a debit, there's a corresponding credit. And so if you're investing everything in the business, there's got to be a debit somewhere else. And we come to realize that. We've got to get that in balance. And so someone that's prosperous, they're financially secure, but they're also happy in what they're doing in life. They're driven, they've got purpose, they've got close family relationships. And I see a lot of people, Brendan, that are super wealthy, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets. And I can tell you right now, they're no happier. They're probably, in a lot of cases, less unhappy than people that have a lot less. So prosperity is really, really important. We've got to think about that. And usually you don't start to think about prosperity until something goes wrong. Like, I lost my business. I lost my wife or husband to cancer. One of my children is sick. I'm sick. You don't start to think about that. And I think prosperity is where we want to be thinking. Just to delve off into the other side of that is I spend a lot of my time in what I call the intergenerational wealth transfer space. So what I mean by that is it's family businesses that are multi-generational, 4, 5, 6 generations. So that business has been passed down through the generations. And I said, my goal is to help those families become intergenerationally prosperous, because you can make a lot of money now. And I'll use a simple example. As dad goes out, works his guts out, builds $100 million, kids hate him, drug dependent, wife leaves him. Well, is that really prosperous? So we've got to start to change that mindset there, and it becomes really important. And to be frank, very few people do I ever see can get that balance right. It's a continual adjustment.
Yeah, some great points, mate. I can only sort of see you've shared your experiences, my own experiences. I didn't go through the health situation, at least as far as I know, but there were times where I was carrying a little bit more weight than what I should have been, but through the corporate process, I was putting a lot into that corporate gigs and going up the ladder and those sorts of things. And there certainly were, that was my credits. There was certainly enough debits, and my wife didn't put it as probably as clear as what Sarah did, but it certainly applied the same way. They weren't seeing the best of me. The organisation was getting the best of me. So it hits a nerve, mate. Let's move this forward into, you talked about the intergenerational wealth, and there's some planning around that. So from a business owner's perspective, there are, I guess, some things that are very relevant. There's the having the business and then who do I pass that on to? Maybe I've got a daughter or a son or, some extended family that's interested. So how do you help people plan for that? And the other thing that's happening today as we speak is there seems to be tough economic times already underway, and there seems to be more tough economic times moving ahead into the future, not only in Australia where we are, but globally. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening. So how do you help businesses plan for that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, so if I can take you back a little bit, just take a step back. So whether you want to sell your business and take a bunch of money and retire with it, or if you want to hand on a business, there's still something going to be, in most times, going to the next generation. So if you sell your business and you get $1 million or $50 million for that business, you invest it, you don't spend it all, you're going to hand it on to your kids, aren't you? Well, in theory, that's what most people want to do. And if you want to hand on the business, well, that's a transition of the business wealth. So either way, you're going to transition some wealth. Now, there was a research study I read a number of years ago out of the US where they actually looked at transferring wealth from one generation to another, whether it be a business or whether it be shares, property, cash, whatever it might be. 70% of those transfers failed. Okay. Now you think about that and you go, 70% failed. What does that mean? Well, what it meant was for these, what they called wealthy families, and this was back probably 15 years ago, is they said they were families that had over $10 million in assets. So that was the business worth 10 million or shares or property or a house. And they said 70% of those families, 70% of that wealth was gone within 2 generations. So there'd been multiple generations basically building this up. We had this family business, we grew it and we grew it and we grew it. And within 2 generations, 70% of it was gone. So within 3 generations, 90% of it was gone, which is humongous. Wow, it's unbelievable. And so they'd see this all the time. And so within the farming world, this is my space. This was really, really important because farms generally get transferred from generation to generation. And I dealt with a lot of business owners and it was the same. Now, the interesting part is they actually worked out what the problems were. And about 3% of the reasons why it failed and the money and the wealth that they built and lost was because of professional advisor errors. So accountants stuffed it up, lawyers stuffed it up. But 60% of the reason was a lack of communication or failed communication and a lack of trust. So that's the number one thing. The next thing was it was 25%. That was a failure to prepare the heirs. So preparing the next generation to be able to take over that asset. And the final one, which rounded it out, was a lack of a family-led mission. So a mission for the business or the wealth. And so if I'm looking at saying you need to build your wealth, you need to think about, is this wealth I'm wanting to build for me? Or do you think it's going to be intergenerationally? And do I want this wealth to be a positive impact on my life and also my children? So if you've got a business and you grow that business and you're a great leader and you sell that business and you get $50 million or even $10 million, you're probably not going to spend that by the time you die. So you're going to hand that on to your children in some way, shape or form. And within a very short period of time, that's all gone. What a waste. Now, the thing people say to me, Brendan, which is I think a really important point, which I came to realize, is they say, well, when I'm dead and gone, if my idiot kids spend all that money, who cares? It's not my problem. I've built it. I've given it to them. I've given them the opportunity. They've lost it. The problem is what has to happen for them to lose it is the big problem. Okay. What has to happen is communication has to break down. Trust has to be lost, infighting, problems in the family, and then it all basically implodes. And you only have to look at Gina Reinhardt right now. You see what's happening in their family, one generation building it, she's built again, gone to the next generation. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen with those billions of dollars, but I can tell you what, it's probably not going to grow. The lawyers are going to get fat, but you see them in the news. They're fighting over the money. There's a lack of communication and trust, and it's going to turn into a disaster long term. So this is what happens with families. So to answer your question directly is I think people need to start preparing for things, so having a plan. So if you are going to transition that business to the next generation, you need to be bringing them in, showing leadership and having a plan, showing them the plan. What's the plan here? How are we going to transition this? And then fostering, working on communication and trust, And remember, we talked about trust before, about reliability, competence, and sincerity. And then also, we have to be really careful about preparing those heirs. Okay, if they're taking over the business, you've got to prepare them to take over the management of the business. If you have widgets, but you also got to prepare them to manage the wealth. And if you do sell that business and you've got a big lick of cash or investments you're going to hand on to your kids, you need to prepare your kids to manage that wealth. So I spend a whole lot of time with families that go, okay, there's a big bunch of money here tied up in these business assets. We've got to prepare part of the family to actually take over the business and actually be able to successfully run, but also then be able to manage the money and the wealth that's generated off that or gets less to the rest of the family. So I'm all about improving communication, building trust, and preparing the next generation to be able to take over.
And what sort of conversations are you having with these families around that building of trust and helping them improve communication specifically?
So the first part is making them understand how critical it is. Most business owners, Brendan, aren't thinking about their kids or their grandkids or their great-grandkids. I think about that a lot because of the space I'm in and the people I'm dealing with. But they don't think about how they're just thinking about their business now and, we're just trying to deal with employees and all that other stuff. So I try to get them out of that mindset and say, there's a period of time you need to start thinking about the longer term objective here. I mean, I don't know if you've spent any time in Asia, mate, but, we have such a short term vision of the future. We talk about the next quarter, the next 6 months, the next 5 years. You go to Asia, they're talking about 100-year business plans. We don't think about that. So I spent a bit of time talking about that. And then the statistics saying, well, you've busted your guts to build all this up. And then within 1 or 2 generations, it's gone. Your family's imploded. What a legacy to leave them. And then we start saying, well, communication's really important. Trust's really important. And so what you need to do is within the family, so there's quite often in our scenarios, Brendan's a little bit different to your typical business, is family and business are intertwined. And so what we do is we end up having structured family meetings or structured business meetings where we practice communication. We practice building trust and then repairing trust that's not there. And then again, that comes back to that simple but a repeatable process that keeps going through. So I would quite often facilitate meetings with the families to start them moving forward and practicing that. Because communication is 60% of the reason, 60 to 70% of the reason it fails. But it's the hardest thing to master, isn't it? I mean, you go to most businesses with business partners when there's a dispute, it's because communication's broken down. So nobody's born with good communications. They have to learn it. And that's what we want to try and do.
And with your podcast and the strategic coaching that you're doing, so how do you help? How do these tools that you have at your disposal that you're pushing out help build these good relationships?
Well, the first thing is it's because of the business sphere I operate in, which is family business. It's about aligning the family. So we first start with a family. It's usually mum and dad that reaches out, in their 50s. That's where we usually get there. They're in their 50s. The kids are in their 20s. They're thinking they're sort of 10 years off retirement. The kids are starting to come through. And the first thing is we need to sit down and go, okay, and work out, and we get the whole family in the room. So that's everyone. And we sit in the room and we go, okay, what's the big picture here? So we try and align the family together so they're all on the same page. Now, that's awful difficult in many families, but it's trying to get them to realize that we're all on the same path here. This is what we need to do. And then we create a strategic plan. So it's what's your 10-year vision? Where do you want to get to? And then basically construct that plan. And then once you've got that plan in place, it's then, the structure or the communication process in place to be able to then regularly meet, to be able to, drive towards hitting that goal or that objective, adjust the plans when they're required, problem solve the roadblocks that you hit, and then basically hold them accountable to that plan. So we always talk about, we want to align the families, so get everyone on the same page, and whether it's a family or a business, we want to align the business owners on the same, so we're all on the same page. We want to grow that wealth, so grow the business, grow the financial assets, and then we want to protect the legacies. And the way you protect the legacies is doing those things like improving communication, building trust, having a mission, and essentially basically preparing the next generation.
Yeah, once again, whether you're an agribusiness or any business, it makes a hell of a lot of sense. You mentioned earlier about the very large percentage of fail, and a big chunk of that, I can't remember the numbers, around professional advice. How do people in business, leaders in business, what do they need to do to seek out the right professional advice? People that actually know what they're talking about and will match the risk profile of the person, the family, the leader for the business.
So that's a tough one. It really is tough. I hesitate to say this, but there's not that many rock star operators out in that space. They're out there, but you've got to find the right person that meets you, that I suppose matches with you and what you're trying to achieve. Now, the first mistake I see, Brendan, people do two things. One is they find a professional advisor, whether that's an accountant, a lawyer, a banker, broker, financial advisor, whoever it might be, and they might say, oh, he's a good bloke, or she's a great lady, I really like them. That's important, don't get me wrong. You need to have someone that you can connect with so you can have the conversations, but they've also got to be competent. And so people make the mistake of they either stick with people who are competent but can't communicate, and therefore you never get the result you're after, or they stick with someone who's nice and friendly and they have some sort of commonality with, but they're technically not that awesome. And so that's the first big mistake. And I think what has to happen there is you have to find those right people, and sometimes you have to shop around. You have to use people for a while, and if they're not the right firm for you, you have to change. And people don't change, not quick enough's not the right word, but they don't change when they should. So that's number one. Number two is you have to get all your professional advisors on the same page. And again, that's difficult. It's simple, but it's not easy. And so I spend a little bit of time with all of my clients where we actually do what we call professional advisor alignment. So we take their roadmap or their strategic plan, we get all their professional advisors in a room, and depending on what that family is, it could be their broker, their finance broker or banker, lawyer, financial advisor, accountant. Not everyone has to be in the room. You can pick who you need. Sometimes it's just the accountant. But you get them all in the room with the family or with the business owners, and you present that plan to them and you say, here's our roadmap for the next 10 years. You guys all now know our plans. How are you going to help us? Okay. And what happens there is people the professional advisors either step up or they're shown up. Okay. And when they're shown up that they're not either one on the same page as you or they're driving in the same direction as you need to kick them to the curb and find another one. And that happens all the time. We find people that we've been working with for years. We're like, oh, that guy Ben, he does an okay job. He's good enough. It's good enough. But when you get all those professional advisors pushing for you in the right direction, you'll end up with a far, far better result. Okay. And it's powerful when that happens. It really is powerful. And I would argue that, most people make the mistake of keeping mediocre advisors on for way too long.
Yeah, just my head's resonating back to sort of just leadership in general and leadership teams, and it's almost like the business owner needs to consider their financial wealth plan, what that looks like, and their path to prosperity, let's say, as they need to be leader of that team. They need to be able to bring the team together, but be mindful of they need to have someone like yourself who's highly competent, but are able to make these strong connections and facilitate good conversation, because your interest is getting the best result for that person's prosperity. There's going back to your point, there's a massive skill in that alone. And back to your point about there's so many people that are maybe not yet competent, is a nicer way of putting it, in their field of supposed speciality.
It's very important. It is hard. And I don't know anyone else that does that. So this is just Ben's, 12 months off riding the lawnmower around, annoying the hell out of my wife, trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. I went, this is a problem I see in most family businesses. How do we fix it? And it's a bit of a moving target, and it's difficult to do because, professional advisors, I was a professional advisor for over 20 years. So I did it. I've sat in the room with clients and I worked my guts out to get the best result. But what happens is either the family has someone like me in my little tiny little area of this earth, and I do what I do to help advocate for the family. But as the leader of the family, this is the way I look at it, is your job is to lead. And so part of that is to walk into a room with your professional advisors and say, this is the mission we're on. And so it's almost like, you're the general of the army. You walk in, this is our battle plan. You're all my sergeants or captains or whatever the bloody hell they are. We need everyone to do their job. How are you going to step up? And if someone doesn't step up, you've got to fire them. And that can be for two reasons too. That can be professionally incompetent. Okay, that's the first one. That's an easy one. Someone doesn't know what they're doing, you sack them, don't you? It's really, really simple. The second one is apathy, and I think that's far more insidious. That's what we call the terrorist. It's the one that's technically competent but not on board. I had one recently where a family reached out to their accountant and asked a question of their accountant, said, we're going to start building our wealth off farm. We want to know which way we should do this. And the accountant didn't even get back to them. They got one of their juniors to write an email back. And in the email, the client said to the accountant, they said, can you call me? I want to have a conversation about this. And they just got an email back from the accountant. So that can actually be far worse as someone that's not on the team than someone that's technically incompetent, because what happens is they're not trying to help you achieve what you need to achieve.
Given your experience in this, have you got a story, something sort of concrete where these sort of connections, where this has played out and it's made such a big difference to the success of the business and that prosperity that we're talking about?
Yeah, so I had I'll try and dilute it down a little bit because I don't want, obviously confidentiality is very important for the people I work with, but I had a situation earlier in the year where I had a client that had some pretty big goals, very ambitious goals, and they're very driven. And we went through the whole process of building a strategic plan up, or what I call a roadmap to get to that 10-year objective. And there's some complexities behind it. But essentially what we did was we got the accountant. So we organised a meeting, and we had myself, we had the accountant, we had the senior tax counsel out of the accounting firm because there was some complexity with structuring. And you don't necessarily need to be a big client to do this. We had the broker, so the finance broker in the room. And we sat down and the client was in the room, and we sat down and we said, this is the roadmap, this is the strategic plan, this is where we're going. And it took about an hour. And at the end of it, every single professional advisor went, holy shit, we finally get it. We understand where you're going, and hell yeah, we want to be on board. And literally the broker had a fire in his belly, the accountant had a fire in his belly, the client had a fire in his belly. The client's wife, who wasn't intimately involved in the business but was there, went, I finally get what all this is about. And so what we ended up with was this beautiful alignment where he ran the business. His wife then understood what was going on. The professional advisors knew what's going on, and you just said, holy dooly, I get it, they get it, we all get it, we're all on the same path. And then we've had a bunch of people that were reactive and now proactive. And he's kicked his 5-year goals within a year. And so this is the power of that, aligning those people. Now, what I want to say is that isn't a regular occurrence. A lot of times it's rare to get a bunch of professional advisors in the room and you go, wow, they're all rock stars. They're all great. They're the exact person. Normally there's some good ones and some not so great ones. This time it was just beautiful to see. It was that click, we all get it. And this is where we want to go.
Yeah, I mean, you use the word alignment and that there's the clarity there, and it's always amazing once you get that alignment and the clarity around these things, the energy that brings in a room. It's like, like you said, we know where we're going, this is our direction, and everyone can contribute. Again, assuming they're competent and highly competent, they can contribute in a way that they know is the way forward to achieve the goal, whatever that roadmap looks like, whether it's in the businesses you're dealing with, whether that's in any sort of industry, it just works.
It does, yeah. What someone said to me once, Brendan, they said it's the 3 C's. It's clarity. So you get the clarity of where you're going and what you're doing. What's the mission we're on? What's the battle objective? that gives you the confidence to take action. And once you've got the confidence to take solid action, then you're going to get certainty, or you're going to get a far greater level of certainty that what you're trying to achieve will actually happen. But you have to start with clarity. And with your professional advisors, you have to get them in a room and you have to give them clarity around your objectives. If they don't know where the hell you're going, how can they help you get there? And I must be really clear here. Some professional advisors, to back them up, have never been asked. And so sometimes you'll find them where you go, oh, my accountant or my financial advisor, they're not that great. But when you help bring them into the fold and explain what you're trying to achieve here and give them the opportunity to step up, quite often they'll do that. So you've got to give them permission.
Yeah, spot on. In all this stuff we've been talking about, like, how have you seen these leaders, these business owners you work with, growing with confidence around, like, when they've got a variety of investments and their prosperity, their wealth is, I'm not sure if secure is the right way, but at least there's a plan to secure the wealth?
So I think that someone said to me once, it's the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, for most business owners, they don't want to work forever. You know, that's not the objective. They don't want to, be making widgets every day for the rest of their lives. Generally, they want to transition out. So building your wealth outside of the business means that you know if you've got a plan, you've got a great level of certainty that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. When I'm 60, I want to retire. When I'm 50, I want to retire, whatever that number is. So that gives them certainty to know they're on the path. And that quite often works well when you've got a husband and wife team in a family business. You know, one of them's going to want to retire earlier than the other. So having that plan gives them so much more confidence that they're on the right path. Number two is, if everything gets plowed back into the business, there can be a level of resentment. You know, you've got to start to take some profits out of the business and be able to invest it somewhere so you've got something to show for it. And then that can be liquefied. So if the business gets into trouble or you want to, expand, etc., you can liquefy those assets. I think that adds a whole lot more confidence. And it's also a level of pride for a lot of people. You know, they go through this process, Brendan, where they build a business and it's like, well, I've achieved that. I know how to make widgets or, whatever it might be. I've worked that out. But then they start to build assets outside and they're going, oh, this is a whole new challenge for me, or I can have some pride in that as well. And that really happens to, or really does make a difference to people.
Yeah, I can imagine. Let's go back to referring back to the mindset, the mind shift, and even taking risks. So what sort of mindset changes do you think leaders need to make their businesses more profitable, which in turn allows some of this thinking and some of this planning that you've referred to through the conversation?
Yeah. That's an incredibly complicated answer for that question. How do they make it more profitable? I think the secret first is what you can measure, you can manage, and what you focus on will be your reality. So I think, for a lot of business owners, they're so busy, head down, bum up with the everyday problems. We've got to produce more widgets. We've got to deal with employees. We've got to deal with suppliers. We've got invoicing problems. We've got IT we've got to deal with. I think the number one thing that worked for me, and I've seen work for a whole lot of other people, is to shift and allocate some time towards working on the business or on building the wealth, not just in the business. So you've got to carve out time. And so I think carving out time to work on the business will increase prosperity. Okay, so it'll increase prosperity because you'll be able to, pop your head up, look around, what's actually going on. I'm not just working. And it goes back to the 7 habits of highly effective people. Why the man sawing the tree in the forest, and he said, mate, it's taken a long time to saw that. He said, like, shut up, I'm too busy sawing to sharpen the saw, dum-dum. It's the same thing. It's pop your head up. And I think it's the attention. So if business owners can get to a point where they go, okay, I need to start building more than just my business value, I need to start building wealth, well, then they need to start giving it attention and allocate some time. And so sit down and regularly do it, and not like, oh, I need Friday off, I'm just burnt out, I need a day off, I might think about it now. Like, actually allocate the time once a month, sit down and look at your wealth plan, whatever it might be, or your strategic plan. But if you can measure it, you can manage it. And if you focus on it, you'll achieve it.
Yeah, once again, makes a lot of sense, mate. So when you're talking with business owners and leaders of their business, there's always an element of risk in this sort of wealth creation process, and people have various risk profiles. But like, how do you encourage the people that you're working with to take some form of risk and to look at new opportunities and to even to educate themselves around what new or this future prosperity could look like?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing is, I'll give you a bit of an analogy. About 15 years ago, I decided I wanted to learn how to sail, and I was living in Brisbane. And I remember I went out in the sailing boat, and I used this analogy. I said, imagine if you're on a sailing boat and you've never sailed before. What are you going to do? You're going to stay in the shallow, the safe bay, Moreton Bay that's in Brisbane, and maybe you might go out a little bit. Keep doing that for 10 years, and you're going to want to sail out in the middle of the ocean, aren't you? And it's the same with risk when it comes to investing or building wealth outside of the business. Is you have to take on risk. Doing nothing quite often, especially with inflation now, is far worse than doing something. And so what I normally say to people is start early and start small. Start to test the market. If you want to buy shares and that's what you want to do, go start buying them. Don't talk about it, buy them. And what I mean by buy them, don't just randomly go out and buy shares. Do your research, know what you're doing, and educate yourself, but actually go out and start doing that. If you don't think you're going to do it yourself, well, then find someone to help you. Now, remember I talked back at the beginning that I'd have farmers who I quite often deal with. If I met any farmer, they'd say to me, I'd say to them, what sort of risk tolerance do you have? Do you consider yourself a risk taker? And they'd all go, oh no, Ben, we're incredibly conservative. We're farmers. We don't take any risk. And I'd say, well, you go take $1 million, buy some seed, plant the cotton seed in the ground, and then hope it rains. I mean, any city slicker would look at this and go, farmers are the biggest risk takers ever. So what I found is business owners and farmers, or who are just business owners, are very much risk takers, but in things they understand. And what I'd find is you go through this process of, remember I said you'd start with a couple of $1,000, you'd invest it, and you'd watch it, and you'd add to it, and you'd add to it, and you get used to it over time, and you go from $2,000 to $1 million. And I've got a beautiful story of an ex-client of mine who we started off with $2,000. This was back 15 years ago. And he'd ring me every week, Brendan, and he'd say, how's that money going? Have you lost it? Have you gone to Mallorca with it, Ben? Have you buggered off with my money? It's like, no, mate, it's still growing. It's doing what it's done. It's gone up. It's gone down. And then 10 years later, there was I remember he's had about $8,000 a month coming out of the business going into these investments. And there was basically $1 million sitting in there. And I looked at him and I said, remember when you first started? And he's like, yeah, I was so scared about all this. I didn't know what I was doing. And I said, well, what's different now? He said, I don't even think about it. He says, just part of business. And so I think you have to build up that tolerance. But be very careful up front that you don't risk, bet the sheep station, so to speak. You don't want to risk everything. And that's where you see a lot of people do is they think, I'm going to go into investing or I'm going to build some wealth. I'm going to go borrow $5 million or $1 million and do a development. And I've never developed anything in my life. Or I'm going to go get $1 million margin loan and do share trading. It just doesn't work out. Educate yourself, start small, but be consistent. Now, the thing with it is, I'll give you a little general rule of thumb. People used to come to me, and because I was a financial advisor, I used to manage their money at that stage, back in those days. And they come in and husband and wife in the business. And a lot of the time, they'd have a bunch of money. Now, that could be $50,000, it could be $5 million. And they'd say, Ben, we've got to invest it. One of them, husband or wife, mostly the husband, would sit there and look at me and go, yeah, I don't want to give you all my money. I reckon I could do better. And I go, fair enough, no worries. And I say, well, you take there's $1 million here or $500,000 here. How much do you want to invest? How much do I want to invest? And let's look at this in 12 months. And in 100% of the times over the 20 years that I did it, basically what would happen after 12 months is the husband would come back sheepishly with his wife and say, put the extra money back in the portfolio. Now, it wasn't because I did a better job than him. Never. It was about the fact that it distracted them. To start with, it was this exciting thing. I'm share trading. This is sexy. This is exciting. I can tell my mates down when I catch up with my mates playing touch football or something like that, I can tell them I'm share trading. And then after a year, it was like some won, some didn't. I'm reading charts. I'm looking at it. Do I sell? Do I buy? And it became a horrible job for them to do. Okay. So if you think you're that person, definitely give it a go. You should give it a go and see what it's like, because I would never try and talk them out of it, Brendan, because they needed to experience it. Now, I'm not saying I could have managed money better than anyone else. There's people out there that can buy and sell and trade and trade shares far better than I could have back in the day. I get that. That's no problem. But you've got to work out, do you want to be a full-time wealth manager, so buying and selling shares, developing property, etc., or not? And if you don't, you're probably going to need to outsource some of that.
Yeah, I guess what I take from that is really that generating wealth and intergenerational wealth is not a passive process. So there may be people that like the process and want to educate themselves and get involved and do it themselves, maybe with some right advice. I get that, but it's definitely not a passive process. If you think that will just happen, then you're going to be sadly mistaken, and I guess sadly disappointed.
Yeah, well, you think about your business. So let's say you had a business at the moment, Brendan, and you'd built that business up over 20 or 30 years, and you'd put managers in. You'd put a manager, an ops manager, a general manager, a financial controller, and you were retired. You and Tracy said, right, we're going to be retired over here. Would you just walk away and leave it? No, you'd be on the board of directors and you'd be watching that company. You wouldn't necessarily be rolling your sleeves up and making those widgets, but you would be overseeing the company from a director's point of view. You'd be looking at the KPIs, you'd be looking at the people, you'd looking at all the industry drivers a certain amount of your time. It's the same with your wealth. You might get your accountant to do work, you might get your financial advisor to do work. You outsource the labor and the specific knowledge, but you don't abdicate responsibility. Okay, that's a really big thing you don't want to do when you're building your wealth, is you don't just go and abdicate it and say, I trust this person, they can do whatever the bloody hell they want, and you just get on with your life. You've got to be involved. You've got to manage it or be the leader in that industry in some way, shape or form. But you've also got to know what I spent a lot of time doing when I was a financial advisor was educating people and, stopping them from making stupid decisions, because, when markets go down, you don't sell, unless it makes sense. So sometimes those professional advisors or those people you get to help you may not tell you what you want to hear. And you have to be a smart enough leader in the show to be able to go, look, Brendan, you're the expert. I default to you, but you should say, help me understand your reasoning. If you can't understand Brendan's reasoning, you've got a problem. And I think that's why, in a lot of times when I did what I did, build the trust, was just I was good at explaining the whys, so people understood, so they got enough information to say, I feel comfortable enough that this is the right strategy. And if it didn't go quite right, because investing never goes perfect, they go, oh, I understood the risks, I understood what we did, it didn't quite turn out like we like, but that's just investing.
Yeah, and the other thing, I guess I have the advantage of knowing you for many, many years, that you're not a person that's worried about trying to show people how smart you are. Like you've said time and time again, you make things as simple as you can, and you're really focused on helping people become educated and understand what you're sharing, not walking away thinking, geez, how smart I am, which is, again, sometimes something that's sorely lacking amongst leadership from time to time, and even business owners. The things that Sorry,
I was just going to say quickly, that was not always the case. So early on in my career, I was taught that you needed to be the smartest person in the room. But I got long enough in my career, Brendan, where I realised the more I learned, the more I knew I didn't know. And I think it was about 7 or 8 years into my 20-odd year career that I realised that saying I don't know was far more valuable than saying I do know.
You're a professional. Can I ask, is that what's helped make you a more confident leader, or is it something else?
I think it probably has, because I'm happy to look stupid. I don't have a problem with that. I used to when I was younger. My self-esteem wasn't strong enough at that stage, but I would have no problems going to a conference or sitting in a room full of people and just saying, I just don't understand. Can you help me understand that? I want to learn. And I was curious, very curious about things. And I think as soon as we stop being curious and as soon as we think we know everything, we're in a whole lot of strife. And then that's, you've uncovered probably a great lesson there. But I see that in a lot of business owners is you get a certain amount of success and then you either think you know everything or you feel like you should. And that's where doctors get into a whole lot of strife I've experienced over the years, and accountants sometimes too, and lawyers, is that they feel this professional pressure that, hey, I'm your cardiac specialist, I'm your GP, I'm your professional tax accountant, I should know the answers to everything. And for me, I learned early on, saying I don't know builds trust. Because when someone asks me a question and I give them an answer, it's only if I know. If I don't know, I'll say, I don't really know the answer to that. Let me do some research. Let me figure it out for you. And I think if a good leader should be able to say, I don't know, you don't have to have all the answers.
Was there a pivotal moment in your career where this wiseness came through, where you realised you needed to listen to that advice?
I think that's an interesting question. I sense that it was the point when I realized it was so stressful to have to portray yourself as knowing everything. And it became far easier for me to say, I don't know, I'll find out. Because trying to present to the world that you know everything or you're the expert in all these areas, it's tiring. And it also grated with my values, I think, in hindsight. Brendan, I was always taught to be honest and your word. And if I tell someone something that's wrong, it would grate on me. So I think it was that values conflict, and then also the fact that it was just so tiring to have to try and pretend you're right all the time.
I love that point you make, mate, because to me it speaks to the ongoing evolution of developing our character. Like it's not I develop my character, which for me is an absolutely core thing within leadership and leadership development. It's not all right, I've ticked the box, my character's good and I move forward. There's always things that are going to challenge us along the way, and it's ability to reflect on our situation, on our experiences in order to keep developing what that looks like for each and every one of us.
Can I just go back a step? This is why I bang on about trust so much. This is like Ben's little thing. There's two things that my nieces and nephews hate me saying. Number one is your choice of spouse will make or break you. So whoever you hitch your wagon to, that's my number one piece of advice to business owners or to anyone out there that's going to succeed in life. You choose the right life partner and you choose the right career, life is going to be so much easier. And the second one is trust. And so I just try and focus everything I do in a leadership position, whether it be working with clients, with a family, et cetera, is build trust. It's like, be reliable and dependable. If I say I'm going to do something, do it. Okay, that's the first one. And I think that endears trust, sincerity. So I actually give a shit about my clients and their families. Like I know them, I know who they are, and I care that they achieve their goals. And the third one is the competence. If I don't know, I'll say I don't know. That's outside of my pay grade. I can't answer that, but we'll find out. And those three things are all where you build trust. And I think whether you're a doctor, whether you're a school teacher, whether you're a policeman, whatever, if you do those three things and you focus on doing those three things all the time, you'll naturally become more trustworthy and people will be attracted to you. You'll attract those people to you. You'll repel people who don't share those same values. And hold the people in your life to the same standard. If your accountant does things like doesn't ring you back when they say they'll do it, that's breaching trust. That's a problem, okay? And I think that's the leadership skill is trust. If you can build that, you're 3/4 of the way there.
Yeah, spot on again, mate. What's in the mix for the next 12 months for you? And the Financial Bloke?
Yeah, I'll keep growing the podcast. I'm loving doing that. I really enjoy it. The reason I did it, Brendan, was twofold. One was because I thought, hey, I'd love to do a podcast and get to meet interesting people like yourself and have these conversations. So it was a very selfish thing. I'm educating myself every day and getting wiser. And there's a big story behind that. And the second thing is that, I was part of that intergenerational wealth breakdown, which I call the three generation curse, which is 2 to make it, 1 to lose it. I think, that's been around for donkey's years. And so I want to keep growing the podcast. That's it. And then keep doing what I'm doing, working with the families that I'm working with and just refining and making it better. The reason I say refining and getting it better is because when I came up with this weird little niche of mine, riding the mower around for 12 months, I couldn't find anyone else that did the things that I did with my background. I'm not saying they're not out there. I just couldn't find anyone. And I know Tony Robbins says the best way to succeed in life is to model people. Find someone else that's successful and model what they're doing, not copy, model. I can't find anyone. So what I'm doing is I'm treading my own path. Someone said to me the other day, it's like a goanna track you're going up, Ben. And if you've ever seen a track of a goanna out in the desert, it's not a straight line, it's back and forward. And that's a little bit what I'm doing. I'm testing, retesting, and trying new things and what works and what doesn't work to try and refine this process. And that's what I want to keep doing over the next 12 months and, making an impact on people's lives. This area that I'm in, financial advice impacted people's lives in the sense that it took a lot of pressure and a lot of stress off people and set them up for life. But I feel like this section of the market that I'm in now will have not only an impact on people's lives now, but it'll be multi-generational. So there'll be the things that I can help families do right now in their business will echo through multiple generations if we get it right, or at least it'll give the skills to the family to be able to echo through the generations. And it's a legacy thing ultimately. It won't be about me. It won't be that generations from now people will talk about Ben Lord. It'll be nothing to do with that. I'll be forgotten. But it'll be the things around trust and communication and building the wealth and prosperity to change those conversations to be able to help families avoid that 3-generation curse, which is 2 to make it, 1 to lose it.
Yeah, linking back that sort of to us, an underpinning that you mentioned about this strong why. You've got a strong why based on your family experience, and that's driving what you're doing day to day, which is why you love it, which is why you care so much about helping the families and the businesses you're working with, and was also, without a shadow of doubt, why you're so good at it and why it's working for you, your family. You're becoming more prosperous every day, let's say. To wrap this up, mate, what I've taken from you, I don't think you've said it in these exact words, but I think one of the things that resonates for me in all this stuff you've said is that as business owners, we can't think about our business as the wealth creation machine. It's almost like the revenue creation machine, the profitability machine that we need to create the wealth that we need and the prosperity moving forward. And I think in my own experience of working with leaders, not on a financial side, but just growing their businesses, not enough of them think that way. They're putting all their eggs into that business basket as opposed to saying, well, this is what I can do to create revenue. And some of them create really good revenue, really good profit, but they're not using that to build the wealth, build the prosperity. That's my sort of solid takeaway. Is that fair to say?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. It's not how much money you've got, it's what you do with it. And I think it's the awareness of if you make that profit in your business, what are you actually doing with it? And a lot of people make a lot of money in business and 10 years later they come back and there's not much there. Sad fact, mate. I used to deal with doctors early in my career. Not as I got later on because I dealt almost all with business owners, but doctors. And I'd see 75-year-old doctors and you'd think, wow, they're a cardiac specialist or an anaesthetist and they're on $1 million, $2 million a year. And I go, these guys just must love their business. Like they just love what they do. And when you dug into it, no, they didn't. They just had no money. They'd been making $500,000, $1 million, $2 million a year. And 20 years later, they had nothing really to show for it. They had a flash house and a nice car, but that was it. And so I think business owners, I agree, is, you're in the business of making profit, but what are you going to do with that profit? And you got to really think about that. Why are you here on this earth? What do you want to be remembered for? Is it spending time with your family? Are you doing what you want to do? You read the book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Have a look at that one day about, the people that are dying, what they regret in their life. Are you doing that? Could you be using that profit to improve your life or the lives of others? So yeah, it's just a different take on things, mate. It's once you've got enough money, more money doesn't change your life for the good necessarily.
Spot on. I also feel like you've got a bit of a hang up about doctors, accountants, and lawyers, mate. You seem to give them a bag out every now and again. But look, let's not go down that path.
well, it's funny. I used to say in my business, and I used to say I don't deal with teachers or engineers. People would say, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, engineers want to know everything, and teachers do." And I've got a sister that's a teacher, and my wife's an engineer, so it was the in joke. But I'm sure it's funny. I've done a lot of podcasts, mate, and like why to sack your accountant and all that sort of stuff. And I've got a lot of those professional advisors actually listen to my podcast, and I always get positive feedback because it's not about bagging the industry or the people. It's the bad behavior. There's shocking financial advisors out there. There's shocking lawyers. There's shocking bankers. They're all over the place. But the people that are doing the right thing and are focused on the family and the results their clients get, they understand.
Ben Law, you are the financial bloke. You're also a pretty decent bloke, even though at heart you're a New South Welshman and not a Queenslander.
Don't tell anyone that.
But you're still a good bloke, mate. Thank you for being a fantastic guest on the Cultural Leadership.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on the other side of the desk.
Wealth and wisdom sit at the intersection of business ownership, leadership, and financial knowledge. These are my 3 key takeaways from my conversation with Ben. My first key takeaway: confident leaders prioritise financial education. They know that understanding how money and wealth work is fundamental to their personal and professional success. By investing in their financial knowledge, they can secure their future. Their proactive approach to financial education provides confidence and freedom. My second key takeaway: confident leaders value their network. They understand that the strength of their connections directly influences their net worth. It's not just about finding successful people, it's about creating connections with people who share similar values. Their network is a valued community for growth and support. My third key takeaway: confident leaders redefine success. They don't define success by financial achievements alone. They know success encompasses well-being, meaningful connections, and a positive impact on others, and overall aligns with their core values. Not only does this bring them true happiness, it inspires others around them to do the same. So in summary, my 3 key takeaways were: confident leaders prioritise financial education, confident leaders value their network, and confident leaders redefine success. Let me know your key takeaway on YouTube or at theculturalleadership.com. Thanks for joining me, and remember, the best outcome is on the other side of a genuine conversation.